Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cannamonitor webinar. This edition, one that we have been wanting to do for a while with Luc Richner, the founder and CEO of Cannavigia. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to go deep on the Swiss market, which I know it hasn't attracted as much attention as, of course, Germany or even the UK, other large European markets. But it's one of the most exciting, I must say, on the near future. It's one of the ones that has a more comprehensive regulatory framework and also one that has more concrete plans to expand the legal framework. So thank you so much, Luc, for being here. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Arnau. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm great. It's not as hot as it was the last couple of days in Switzerland. We just talked about it before. I hope some of the people out there are somewhere at a beach or near a beach. And if they are, why are you here? No, I'm happy to be here. I want to apologize to you and everybody out there for moving it last time. I had some family situations that I had to attend to. Very excited to be here. Very excited to share what Switzerland has been up to. Before the summer holidays, we didn't do much over summer except sweating, like I think everybody else out there. So yeah, let's kick this off. Excited to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Luc. And like always, we have 1 hour, very packed, about 5 minutes per slide. And a deck we're going to cover from the beginning, from the history of the regulation to the medical market, to the supply chain in Europe and in Switzerland, to the pilot projects, which I know is something that a lot of people are interested in. Thank you so much to everyone that has connected on an 11th of August. nice summer webinar. So Luc, unless you have any other preliminary comments, let's go straight into it.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So of course, the first thing to set the tone for the discussion. Switzerland, there's been a lot of talk, regarding the medical market, but also on the CBD side, for instance, it has been a force to be reckoned with in the European context, and now it's probably the clearest path to legalization that exists in a European market. So I wanted to ask you this theme that we made the webinar about, like the next market of scale in Europe. Do you agree with this vision, Luc, or what do you think is the future for the Swiss market?
I mean, I definitely think we have a rightful place, but we also know the size of our country and are very humble about it. So we're never the next big thing, but I think we, through our size and through our clarity of regulatory understanding and further history with the plant and everything, we have a clear path forward. We will be most probably the first country with a comprehensive, recreational, medical, etc. market forward. But for Switzerland in general, we're never the next big thing. We're just the next thing, and we're very excited about that.
Glad to hear. So, okay, to set the tone for the rest of the discussion, let's look a little bit at the potential size of the market in Switzerland. And it's interesting because Switzerland is one of few countries in Europe that we have epidemiological surveys conducted by the government that compare THC and CBD use. This may be because of the importance that the CBD hemp sector has had in Switzerland over the last decade, but this gives us interesting data on the usage, by age band and also by gender, by frequency, and so on. So what we see in this first graph is the thousands of users per age group, and we compare both male and female, which are stacked, and THC and CBD. And something that I believe is interesting here is that the curves for THC and for CBD look quite different. So we see that THC use tends to be more prevalent on younger people. So if you will look at the group between 15 and 24, we see there's almost 90,000 users for THC compared to 33,000 users for CBD. Whereas if we compare a little bit more middle age, so between 35 and 44, we see that actually the number of users of THC and CBD is a lot more equivalent, I would say. And then if we look at the pie charts, we also see that in terms of frequency of use, THC use tends to be a little bit more frequent, with 1/3 of the yearly users using weekly or more. And in CBD, it's perhaps a little bit more sparing in terms of use. So look, given this data that it's not available for other markets in Europe, I know that CBD has had an important role in the Swiss market. So in your perspective, is this 350,000 users for THC, 200 for CBD, something that you think reflects the importance of the CBD market in Switzerland?
Well, to go a bit back historically, why the CBD market is prevalent in Switzerland is something that has some significant also data around it. Switzerland, this is part of how we started at Cannavigia, getting into this regulatory mumbo jumbo at the time. You had 1% THC limits for CBD in Switzerland. You had 0.6 in Italy, 0.3 in Germany, and 0.2 in France, if I'm not miscorrect. No, I think that's it. So at the time there was still, food supplement, general cosmetics, very much novel food was not that in the center in Switzerland. So we had all these products. We had a fully blooming CBD market with tinctures, with oils, with all kinds of different applications. So historically there, of course, we had a different start and a different basis within CBD. Why does that also add on top to the importance of those numbers and the Swiss market specifically? We had a chance to build the market on a cannabis light, where we had the chance to build certain frameworks, build certain processes around how this industry could look like if certain stages of compliance, be it pharmaceuticals and so forth, come into it with a, let's say, more slap on the wrist, and you're not a criminal if you do something wrong within the CBD market. So it really gave Switzerland a head start to build an industry end-to-end supply chain from cultivations, manufacturers, all the way until, we come a bit later to that, why that's important and how this is a very Swiss thing to do.
Absolutely. You're great at being the first movers, it seems like, and it pays out. And yes, later we can talk a little bit more on the supply chain. For now, let's further go into the historical perspective that you were mentioning, Luc. Of course, even before what we have in the timeline, I know in 2004, there was already an attempt to legalize adult use or normalize it in the Swiss context. There was a referendum in 2008 that was defeated by quite a bit of margin. And then let's say I would say the main milestone that starts the modern legal framework for cannabis in Switzerland is 2011, when the Federal Office for Public Health granted special authorizations to access medical cannabis products. And this framework lasted about a decade until in 2022, these authorizations were dropped, and now the doctors could prescribe directly without asking for this special authorization. There were about 2,500 to 3,000 authorizations granted each year when this scheme was active. So already one of the earliest markets in Europe, we can say, even for medical cannabis. There was the Netherlands and not very many of the other frameworks, including Germany and so on, were even later. Other changes that were important were, like Luc was mentioning, the 1% THC threshold in 2011, or then in 2016, this consideration of CBD flower as a tobacco substitute that then was dropped by some court judgments, as far as I understand, but that further established the trade of CBD flower at a moment where, at the same time as the Farm Bill in the United States or the hemp law in Italy, so also one of the first movers for the hemp market. But then something that I believe both the CBD and the medical schemes, I mean, I'm interested in your view, of course, Luc, have become established in the Swiss framework, and now more and more the talks have been switching towards how can we allow the adult use. And this started from 2021 with these approvals of the pilot trials in specific cantons, of which we have up to 8 now, and Cannavigia serves as their compliance partner for the track and trace for the government. And now this has resulted in this public consultation with over 100 submissions that was recently presented, and this draft law of the CanPG that is to be presented towards the end of this year, debated in Parliament. And this could eventually evolve into another referendum that could be by 2028 or 2029. And if this passed, this could mean legalization, the first country in Europe that actually legalizes cannabis for adult purposes, given that in a commercial setting, that is. So, Luc, you are very well attuned to the developments, political developments also in Switzerland. So, do you think this debate that is to happen at the end of the year, if we manage to get this, are we going to have the first legal market in Europe before the end of this decade?
Before the end of the decade is always a little bit speculative, and whenever it comes to regulatory processes and everything, we don't want to speculate, right? But look, there was a small pushback in the last session, and now it's going to do another loop. Basically, not this session now that's coming. It's all moved a year later. Overall, yes, we're on track to be the first fully legalized recreational and medical. It's always important to see that we have both sides, which is the special differentiator here, not just a decriminalization, but a full legalization. And look, I mean, there are talks that it might be 29, 30, probably rather 30, depending on how the next referendum debate goes. 31. In cannabis, we always like to take the lower number because it makes us look better. In the past, that has not really been very much in our favor. So let's just say 31 is very realistic. Everything else is a bit speculative. In general, there's two things that I see that are potential pushbacks or potential things that can kind of change the course of direction of this. One of them is, in general, across Europe, politically, we're not really moving to the side that favors cannabis. We're rather moving to the other side for many reasons we don't want to go into right now. So this is let's say, a potential roadblock. And the other one, of course, in general, whenever there is something, Switzerland is always direct democracy. It always goes back in front of the people. There will be a referendum. There will be the public vote on it. In the end of the day, public vote usually can be pushed into favorable decisions by, be it lobbying, PR, responsible treatment of industry participants, or responsible behavior of industry participants within the given regulatory framework, which in cannabis has not always been something that came naturally in the past, unfortunately. So I throw this into the audience and to everybody out there. Your behavior can have a direct influence on how this goes, because there's definitely a lot of voices against it. Those voices are usually more structured. So we celebrate when this is over the line, but we have a clear path. We have a formulated law. The law has been done in back and forth with all kinds of stakeholders. This is not the Cannabis Industry Association or anybody from the industry. We're a small part to this. There is all other kind of stakeholders that have been involved in. And what has been nice to be able to show in Switzerland, look, we've done recreational pilots for the last couple of years. Nobody died. There's not more accidents. There's not. So these are all things that kind of soften and smoothen some of the conversations. There's a clear path. We're very optimistic. 29, tough. 30, 31, very possible.
Very interesting, Luc. And you mentioned something quite relevant, which is the European dimension that you said, of course, Switzerland is not in the European Union. We remember when Germany was discussing their legalization plans, that they were sending their plans to the European Commission. And, this was a big part of the discussion. How do you think this plays into the Swiss context? Do you think that there can be pushback from neighbors of Switzerland, or the fact that you are not in the EU is actually helpful in this context?
Both. I mean, on one hand side, we've had pushback in the past, mainly from Germany. Germany now steamrolled ahead, not just to the positivity of a clearly regulated, forward-looking market. Doesn't help if you don't have a stable government, but that's a different discussion for another time. In general, Switzerland we will not, there's no influence on what the countries around say. Also, at the same time, if we look at Uruguay, if we look at a couple of other countries, Canada that just went ahead, there was also no international no international pushback to cut them out of all kinds of pharmaceutical agreements and so forth, which theoretically under 1961 should be. So in the end, if nobody goes against it, you can do. So that's something that has been a showing in cannabis to be the anti-cannabis lobby is not that. Well, no, I'm taking that back. They're very active. But at the same time, I don't see pushback from outside countries. I don't see, since Switzerland has voted to get this to a certain level, the only hindering can come from within. And is it a blueprint for Europe? In the end, everything we've done is in line with international law, with international standards. It is very, very much a blueprint, even more than a blueprint, because the blueprint underlaid by data of, addiction, harm reduction, all kinds of different studies that are being conducted within these pilot projects. So it's not just somebody came up with a framework, we copy whatever the Quebec model or something. Yes, of course, you have to lean on something that is out there. But in the end of the day, there's been more real world data going into this that made it more realistic to get through. So, yeah.
Very insightful, Luc. And later we'll talk about the pilots for sure. Okay, so moving forward, also still in the stage that we are sizing the opportunity, the estimate regarding the broader cannabis use market in Switzerland is that there's over 250,000 monthly users. This means that some estimates place the value of the current illicit market north of, 580 million Swiss francs, which is over 700 million US dollars or over 600 million euros, which is interesting. However, I would say this means a monthly prevalence of use of about 3%, which is not the greatest in the world. By North American standards, it's not a huge one. But something else that's relevant here is the estimate by Swiss Patient Association, Medcan, that over 100,000 patients would be self-medicating using cannabis. This would equate about 1.2% of the population, which is more in line to what we see in established medical cannabis schemes. Let's say like in Germany, it's now at about 1% accessing the legal market, more or less. And the thing is that only 10,000 of these patients in Switzerland are actually accessing their products through the established framework in the pharmacy. So this means under 10% of the patients are getting it GMP products from the pharmacy and so on. 90% are still either home growing or getting it from friends or from the illicit market. And even more so, of these 10,000 patients that are accessing a regulated product, the amount that gets reimbursement is very, very low. Some associations have said as low as only 70 patients actually getting partial or full reimbursement, which is, of course, very, very little. And even the public investigation Mecana, which is like a doctor survey, says that 85% or more of the treated patients are not receiving any kind of reimbursement. So looking at these figures, Luc, of course, it's obvious that there's still a lot of potential on the medical side within Switzerland. So in your opinion, what would be the key to unlock this potential on the medical side in Switzerland?
I mean, everybody always talks, specifically right now, we have these moments in Germany, reimbursement here, reimbursement there. I don't think reimbursement really is a driver in this. Reimbursement, you need clinical studies, you need to understand what really treats whom and why and what are there. Some of them it's very clear, they already get it. I'm not going to share how many percentage I really believe are actually supposed to get medical access, and so how many should go for a regulated recreational access. In the end of the day, that number varies, and well, again, I'm not going to say what my personal opinion is, but let's say very, very much not in a halfway, maybe more in a, well, very much medical has a smaller percentage. In Germany, of course, it was different. We had self-payers that almost created a $2 billion market, but they only really had proper access through the medical market. So in the end of the day, it comes down to convenience. It comes down to quality of product, convenience. Again, that's my opinion. Ease of access. And price is not that much of a driver, as we've seen within the pilots. Some like it's a driver, but it's not that much for the driver. Really, convenience is a very big push. Biggest unlock, in my opinion, for the medical market, very clearly, again, comes down to education. It comes down to educating the doctor. It comes down to being a clear single voice, which we have great associations in Switzerland. We have some great speakers of medical associations or front-facing people of medical associations that are doing a great job at portraying also what this can do for people that really need it. At the same time, there is always one or the other outliers that are, trying to follow a German model. In the end of the day, Switzerland, as with everything, will have a more level-headed approach to this. So the real unlock for medical market is if a doctor prescribes it to you, things change. But all the other blockers that are out there or being talked about, I don't really think they actually have that much influence. I think it's really comes down to convenience, educating the doctors, educating the patients, educating also in general the system of understanding what works for what, and different forms. Smoking might not be a medicine that the majority of doctors would prescribe to you if there is another way of ingestion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting, Luc. So okay, let's go into some of the medical data. First caveat here is, again, this is from this MECANA report that substituted the analysis of the special authorizations that the Federal Office of Public Health was publishing, and it's only a small fraction of the market. So we see that about 1,200 patient reports in the period of 2023 to 2025, when, depending on the estimates, we are talking 6,000, 10,000 patients, or even a little bit more. So we see that it's a small sample, what we have here, just to keep it in mind. But still, something interesting to see is that we have over 400 reporting doctors. This doesn't mean that they have patients under treatment. And actually, the majority of the doctors that are reporting this information to the regulator only have a couple of one or zero or two patient reports, because it's a bureaucratic mess to fill it up and so on. But still, the fact that there's over 400 doctors that are at least interested in prescribing cannabis products, I wouldn't say it's too bad. Even in larger markets, like let's say in the UK, it's a little bit lower, or Czech Republic, which is a similar size as Switzerland. We also see a little bit of a smaller prescriber base. And of course, as Luc was saying, expanding the prescriber base is always a big driver of the market. But perhaps, they are still prescribing very little or for very few cases. I would like to get as well your view on that. Then if we look at the graphs on the right side of the screen, here again from the same source, we have the share of the patients divided by the main symptom that they report, and also by the main condition that they report. And what we see is, of course, like every medical market that is scaling, pain is the main indication, and it remains like this, with 3/4 of all the symptoms that are being treated with medical cannabis. But we might say that between the end of the old regime and this emerging new regime, we see a little bit of an increase on the sleep as a main symptom, which is now almost already in 1/4 of patients, the condition. And also, for instance, depression, which is relevant. And this also reflects on the conditions, because we see mental, behavioral, psychiatric conditions also emerging more than the oncological patients and so on. Something that has been interesting and that maybe is also changing this landscape over the last few months is the emerging of online platforms that are seeking to facilitate these prescriptions by the ease of getting a prescription and the ease to get the products, and product comparison platforms like we have seen in other markets as well. So in your view, Luc, does this tell us that Switzerland is evolving in a similar direction as Germany in this telemedicine-driven market, mostly online and so on? Or do you think that Switzerland will remain a little bit more conservative on the medical side?
I mean, if we look how Germany, was unhinged, it completely went slightly out of well, let's just say it scaled very fast. Telemedicine was the driver. There are many voices on what, how, and why. I'm going to keep to myself what I think of a certain way of prescribing something if you want to have it in a medical market. Again, Germany didn't really have an alternative, so it's different. Switzerland does have an alternative. So for the regulator, there is another approach and another way to push something in a certain direction. In general, of course, that could be the biggest amplifier, looking at what happened in Germany. But I think I know the Swiss regulator is very, very actively looking at this field. Look what happened in Poland, right? It exploded, and it's been a bit more level-headed. Switzerland is studying very closely the developments around Europe in that case, or in this telemedicine scenario. At the same time, Germany, there's talks between the regulators from the different countries out there. There is, can you prescribe? Switzerland is not European Union, so we're not part of, can we prescribe from one country to another country and so forth. So there's a bit more checks and balances on that, let's say. So to cut a long story short, I do not believe telemedicine will be in any way, shape, or form close to what it's been in Germany. I believe there will be a way, and there's a rightful way for telemedicine. Don't get me wrong. This is something where we're moving on with technology. I'm the last to say we should not move forward with technology, but Switzerland will have a more level-headed approach where also, don't forget, it's a smaller country, so understanding movements of things are faster. We are way more established and have a much longer history with what we're talking about here than Germany had. So there's not a zero to hero overnight. Let's just go and pump this and hope for the best and pay some lawyers to kind of block the sidelines. No, it won't happen in that way. It will be a more clearly structured approach. At the end of the day, we will have also, doctors will have to be somewhat more in the loop. And I mean, I don't want to speculate where this goes because nobody really knows. But in the meantime, let's just say it's not a field that we're actively looking into.
Okay, thank you for the insights, Luc. Another aspect that is also very relevant, especially for foreign players that are looking at Switzerland as a potential import market and so on, is the product landscape, which has been evolving quite a bit over the last years, I would say. So before the 2022, it was pretty much all based on tinctures and oils, some of which were manufactured locally. There was also the possibility to import. It's also one of few markets, together with Austria, Germany, and Denmark, that has a dronabinol market historically that has been also relevant, a market for THC isolate preparations, magistral preparations in the pharmacy made with THC isolate. And what we see, this again, based on this a small sample from the Mecana data, is that the situation is evolving quite fast between the two periods that we have analyzed here. So we see that the flower in 2023 was barely 2% of the share of the products that were being dispensed to patients in this sample. And by 2024 and 2025, this had already jumped to 26%, so 1/4 the products. But it's not only the flower. For instance, Switzerland was one of the first countries in Europe that had concentrates arriving in the pharmacy, so hash, even in some cases. One of the first countries to import from Morocco, I must say, even though this is perhaps more a supply chain question. But in any case, there's this explosion of product formats, and we have seen also in Germany but also in the UK and so on, that when these markets, telemedicine-driven markets, start scaling very fast, they usually rely a lot on the flower. So, Luc, in your opinion, do you think that the Swiss market will follow these trends that we have seen in other markets and trend more towards recreational dosage forms, you could say, or perhaps not? Of course, I believe in the legitimacy of flower and so on. But in any case, do you think it will remain on these oral extracts as it had been historically, or will it evolve towards other type of formats, in your view?
I think the looking at how the market developed and how we really had a market that could develop over time, we are not a nascent market in that sense where everything runs to flower. As you said, there's already been a well-established oil tincture market. I see it as you will have a certain level of medical products. There are more further processed products, and then you have access for, things like flour and so forth. We have this whole discussion going on globally now, pharmaceutical, GACP, GMP, when is what. In the pilot projects, you have to follow GACP, so there's a rightful place for that. There's a sense behind that. If you have, if you consume a medicine, if you're a patient, you have to have a standardized product, standardized formula. It is, and our background, what Cannavigia does in the end, is partially helping people to follow those processes to keep the standardized output. And I can tell you, it's not very easy to keep a standardized, regular, consistent output for a flower. It's just not within what nature thought what it should do. So a rightful place for all the different forms. In the end, I clearly think there will be, on the medical side, a push towards other formats, and flower users, except if they have really, really, strong arguments against it, will be kindly asked to move over to the recreational market. But again, this is my personal opinion. There will be some people screaming this or that, but in the end of the day, definitely, and just quickly, in the medical and in the recreational market, we also already have oils, we have edibles, we have drinks coming. So these more other doses, other forms of consumption for recreational purposes are also something that are on the verge, or are already existing, or on the verge of even getting more let's say, popular over here. So looking at how the US developed, looking at how other markets developed, looking at the health consciousness in general is moving. Looking also, which I think is very important, if you look at the recreational pilots, it's a maximum of 20%. This idea of, biggest bang for the buck, highest THC strains. This is a very, very, very recreational approach that has been kind of undercut in Switzerland. And we see a very wide acceptance to it, where a lot of people understand, oh, there's a balance to this. Oh, it doesn't have to be just one. There's different kind of balanced parts to it. So basically, look, of course, flower is flower, cannabis is cannabis. There is a historical understanding, or there's a culture around smoking. But if you look in every other aspect of our society, smoking is not something that is getting more popular. So I would say cannabis follows here in the footsteps of other trends out there.
That's very interesting, Luc. And I may ask, do you think that the pharmaceutical orientation of Switzerland, even within the cannabis space with advanced manufacturing and so on, will make advanced dosage forms more prevalent in like vapes, the edibles, like you were mentioning, rather than more raw formats? Do you think that this can be a specialization of Switzerland, or not necessarily?
Absolutely. I think this is part of our next question, where I go a bit deeper into that specific side, why I believe Switzerland has a rightful place in the global supply chain. when it comes to finished products or semi-finished products.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, here we show some examples of players in Switzerland. Of course, there's a lot more than we couldn't represent. But when we compare it with other European markets, I would say that we have quite a diversified landscape, because we have all sorts of manufacturers, extractors, growers as well, different types of growers, indoor, greenhouse, and so on. And also at least in the medical side, but also in the recreational and even in the CBD, it's of course a highly internationalized industry. It's not its self-contained market, I would say. So, for instance, we saw that many of the CBD players that were producing in Switzerland have become interested on high THC, both for medical export and for the pilot projects. Also, something interesting here is you mentioned the 20% cap in the pilots, but we have more potent products being produced for the medical market, which is maybe we can discuss it later, but this can be it's a little bit of a contradiction, no, potentially, but whatever. So in any case, look, as you were mentioning as well, now with the GMP tightening and all the debates around conversion, now with the Hesse state in Germany requiring drying under GMP, all the drama in Portugal, where I know you are also very well connected, and so on. What do you think is the role of Switzerland in this evolving European supply chain for cannabis, for regulated cannabis?
I mean, if we look at Switzerland, right, we're a high cost country. We will never be the volume game. We will never be the ones that do certain processes. The cheapest will never be the cheapest cultivation and so forth. But look at our pharmaceutical industry. We built one of the biggest pharmaceutical industries in the world by further processing, standardized processing, layers of trust, layers of traceability, layers of transparency. And there are all these, let's say, in between ways of doing things that now have been, I mean, Portugal, yes, we have quite some customers down there where, regulators don't release anymore. There is a centralized system in Europe coming for import and export. Again, the biggest potential downfall of the industry is itself here again, because how many of them declared what came in and what went out in the correct way? Let's say because they didn't know better or whatever other reasons I do not want to get into. So Switzerland will be the place where this, this is not our game. Our game in Switzerland historically has always been, how do we build a sustainable long-term industry, economically sustainable, of course, always also ecologically sustainable, and how we can actually become a central hub for further manufacturing, further processing. And if we look at what is happening in Portugal and in other countries around Europe right now, that trust layer from other countries has broken away. And I know this as a fact. There is a lot of everybody's knocking on the Swiss producers or manufacturers' doors. They're willing to pay a premium, and I'll quote here someone that is doing further manufacturing here. He says, a pallet of cannabis can be up to, I don't know, a couple of 100,000 volume. Do you send a pallet with a couple of 100,000 to a country where you don't even trust, to depending? I'm not going to use any stupid analogies here, but let's just say some countries have more trust, some countries have less trust. So we're talking about a high-value product, whereas little disruption of the supply chain can actually cause a lot of harm and a lot of ripple effects down the line. So these short-lived games that we've been seeing the last couple of years, the last 2-3 years, I believe anyways, are being they're going to be cut out. So Switzerland very much has a very, very strong position within this industry. Also, regulator wants this. The regulator wants Switzerland to be a manufacturing hub. Of course, always within the legal framework, within the compliance standards, within all of those parts. So to answer your question, Switzerland, look at our pharmaceutical industry. We're not producers, we're further manufacturers, and we've made a pretty good work for ourselves in that. Because once you come to a certain level of high cost products, and cannabis is a high cost product, It's just what it is. Yeah, cut a long story short, I do believe Switzerland has not just a very strong place in this. I think we have a very strong future in this. Also, not just looking at Germany, looking at other countries around the world. Sometimes it's good to be part of the European Union. I think it's also good for us that we're not part of the European Union, because Switzerland can be a manufacturing hub globally. We have a lot of bilateral agreements. If another country around the world has a similar legal framework as we can move fast. So yeah, look, I mean, normalization, standardization of an industry has certain services around it also. That's something we're looking at the moment when it comes to, Switzerland is also a financial hub, right? So who says that cannabis has to work without all these financial services around trade financing or stuff like that? So look, cut a long story short, I'm very bullish in Switzerland for many obvious reasons, not just because I'm from here, but and again, we'll never be the biggest. Can never say you're the best, but let's say we thrive for quality over quantity, and I believe this is what this industry needs at the moment. So yeah, excited to see this further unraveling, and the countries around us maybe not do things the way we do it, which plays into our favor.
Interesting. So even last year, when the Portuguese issues began appearing, there were many people were saying, okay, there are going to be new hubs emerging for this sort of GACP to GMP conversion and so on. Of course, Switzerland is not part of the EU, so you cannot do the batch release directly for German pharmacies and so on, which is a slight deterrent there. But still, let's say we have seen the Czech Republic or even Malta emerging, but Switzerland there's many manufacturers and so on, but we haven't seen, for instance, imports of, GACP products from Canada, for instance, going to Switzerland en masse. Do you expect this to be like a strategic advantage for Switzerland? You think you're going to remain on the advanced manufacturing side, let's say, rather than on the trading game and the conversion, which has happened also in the CBD market, for instance? Switzerland is a producer, but it's also an important trading hub, I would say. Do you expect this to happen as well on medical, or not quite?
I very much expect this to happen in the medical. I know it's being worked on right now, and I know some companies are having success in that field right now. If anybody has questions, very happy can reach out directly. I'll be happy to guide you in the right directions. There is definitely within the legal framework ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. We are getting already to the end of the webinar. We are going to go now to the pilot projects, which I know is what everybody wants to discuss as well. Just everybody that's following us, I can see already some comments that we're going to answer at the end in the Q&A, but please keep it coming. Any question that you have, do not hesitate to write it, because Luc's going to answer them at the end. So, okay, let's go into the pilot projects, which have been, since, as we saw before, since 2021, there's been more and more announcements of pilot projects, and here we have them ordered from the first one to the later one that were announced, including recently a new one in St. Gallen. And we see that the average size of these projects has been increasing over time. And also, we have quite a bit of different models there, like including from clubs to pharmacies to dispensaries to public government-run stores, private run stores, etc., etc. So it's actually, the data is great, and I know Cannavigia has analyzed them. So Luc, do you think that now that we are already looking at 2030 as a potential horizon for legalization and so on, do you expect many more pilot projects to become announced, or you think we're going to deal with the ones that we have already?
There is definitely, I think it's 2-3 things before about new ones. Is some of them run out, right? They have a certain time of study is concluded after a certain amount of time, and what we have seen and heard, and what kind of the underlying track record is that the ones that would have kind of run out at a certain point extensions are made, if wanted, of course, something that is more approachable, so they're not going to be cut off. So if it takes a little bit longer, it's like not that Switzerland would not now, okay, you had access for legal cannabis within your dispensary or in your pharmacy or in your drug checking public addiction center, whatever, different, like they would not just drop you back into the illicit market. That's not something that is within. There is a lot of pilots in the how you say last stages of going through the legal hoops, right? It's not okay, they have to say this, they have to say this, they have to say this. It always goes through an array of different stakeholders within cantons, within cities, within nationwide, and so forth, within the BRG. So I'm very confident we'll see a couple more. Will there be as many? I heard some people spreading rumors that they will just basically allow as many till everybody that wants regular access. That will not happen, right? We're still in a study kind of environment. But I would say, and I believe Switzerland, the BRG, who we've worked with for the last 5-6 years, are very level-headed, are very, very realistic about this, and are very much, again, it's within harm reduction, right? It's not pushing one thing to the other. Also, if something is not thought through, a study should not be approved. So there is a momentum forward. And why are these so important, these pilots also right now, is of course it does not change how the law is written, but it changes how the people see, and the people will have the popular vote at a later stage, how the industry is treating this chance and this opportunity to work within a recreational access framework. So a lot is on the line. I know the guys out there, and we work with all of them, and they all see, a lot of them have been working towards this goal of recreational legalization for much longer than me. So a lot is riding in their hands, and there might be a few. There will be most probably a few more, but overall, and the whole overall project goes till 31. And I expect some interesting, not interesting developments, but some. I think I expect some really nice best case scenarios also for other countries and other regulators to look at. Look, this is what Switzerland has done with the pilots. This is how this could work. Because don't forget, Holland has very different pilots. The Netherlands had a very different history with cannabis. They have very different problems to solve within access of recreational cannabis. Every country has a different basis. So there is no blueprint out there that will kind of allow for everybody to be, made wholesome and happy within this. So the worst thing that can happen if there is a unified new law across Europe that says it's going to be like this, because a lot of people will, let's just say, it will not go in the industry's favor if that would be the case.
Mm-hmm. So certainly evidence-based policy has been pioneered by Switzerland in this case. I think it can be used in so many other countries. So this has been great, and especially when we look at the results that some pilots have already been started publishing, and they are honestly quite great everywhere on a variety of dimensions. This, of course, doesn't come as a surprise to us in the industry. Otherwise, we wouldn't believe in it. But still, I believe that, as you were saying, look, this can really force the hand a little bit of some critics and the regulators and so on. So just to give some nuance into that, and of course, if you think something is important, I'm also interested, Luc. But in terms of consumption, none of the pilots that have released data show a massive increase in consumption post legalization. It's rather stable or even dropping slightly in some cases. All of them are showing an important black market displacement, which of course is always the big argument for legalization. All this money that is untaxed and serving criminals could be brought to light for sure. And there's millions and millions of Swiss francs that have been diverted from the black market. These potency caps, this I'm also really interested to know your opinion on them. If you agree, if you think there's arguments for the pricing caps. In terms of pricing, we know that a regulated market can outcompete the illicit market. They are not going to go without a fight, but the Swiss pilots, maybe because they are very limited in scale, so it's not a giant thing, they have managed to undercut the illicit market in pricing. We have great satisfaction from most of the patients, of the users, on being able to access safe products in a controlled environment, etc., etc. There hasn't been any big scandal or any big, problem linked to the consumption in health terms in the pilots. And actually, some of the worst things that are associated with cannabis consumption, which are, for instance, using as well with tobacco, the fact that you have access to controlled products, can reduce this usage of tobacco actually, or granting new dosage forms, like Luc was mentioning before, like with the edibles and so on, is something that can limit as well the use of more dangerous products, such as tobacco products, for instance. So I think that all around there's a lot of interesting information, and I don't know what you think. Luc, do you think this is going to be relevant? You were saying more for to deter the critics in a way, rather than to change the regulation, the CanPG itself. So what do you think is going to be the outcome of all this massive evidence generation that is being carried out through the pilot programs?
So I want to highlight one thing before we go into it. You had the three cities here: Lausanne, Basel, Zurich. Those are all government organized, government run. Harm reduction in the center. It's always harm reduction in the center, but these are the three projects are run by the city. And House, as we know, is by Sanity Group, so it's let's call it, it's not commercial, don't get me wrong, but it's more from a commercial angle, from an industry participant. And something that I would like to highlight, what people always like, everything sounds positive, the industry always wants to make themselves look good. Those are government-run projects, and they still make the industry and overall the outcome quite positive. So that's something I always like to highlight. Also, what I like to highlight is that price is not just a driver. It is a bit of a driver, but it's something that in the end, quality and ease of access is what's one of the main drivers. And to answer your question, how this will influence the legal framework, in the end, the CanP is written, right? That has been, of course, there's been some of that data that went in there, but the CanP is written. There are a couple of things that will be polished here and there. This data will go into the polishing of it. But the main part where I think this is really, it will have an impact is if in the end, the voices that are neutral, in the end, you always have voices that are against, swing voters in the middle, and that are for. So there's certain, on the outliers, you don't have to convince, or you will never convince. It's all about how do we convince the ones in the middle. And the ones in the middle, you usually convince with data, with understanding of we're not stepping into the unknown, taking away a lot of the risk, a lot of the harm reduction factors within that allow, them to understand, okay, we're not poisoning our children and so forth. These are all very viable things that have to go in here, because we come from, decades and decades of education in the other direction. So I see this data and these pilots very much driving the flow of information, and hopefully also, with things that we're doing here. That's also why I'm here today, because, of course, I saw before somebody comment, this is old data. Well, there's old data. There's not really yet very qualified new data all around. One thing is having data on hand. The other thing is making studies around that data and then putting them through the stress test of more socioeconomic, sociocultural studies, as the pilots are. So these are parts where I think it really have a big influence. And looking in my notes here, of course, the hurdle that we have to overcome with the votes, which this will help to. What I really believe are one of the special things about the pilots, it's coming back up in Germany now, it's coming back in other countries, is let's try to create from the bottom up also kind of a framework or influence a framework that works for all sides involved. And all sides involved doesn't mean industry has to make most money, doesn't mean a government has the easiest way of whatever. It has to work for everybody. It has to work for people on the one side, on the other side, and the people in the middle.
That's very interesting, Luc. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Thank you so much for all the insights. We're going to jump to all the questions by the audience now. Just first, one by myself, Luc, regarding the potency caps, because I see that the design of some of these pilots, and it seems like there's an appetite by the regulator in Switzerland to establish some sort of potency cap, which in my opinion can, first keep patients or keep users in the illicit market that doesn't have the cap. And also it might push some of these users to the medical market where there's 30% THC products available. So do you think this cap will hold? And do you think it's a good idea to have a cap?
I'm very positive to a cap. At the same time, well, first and foremost, there was the discussion, will you test a new industry? Well, will you test do a pilot project based on selling, hard liquor, or do you do wine and beer from the mindset, right? So you start with a softer kind of, it's also very favorable to the industry in general, because imagine people would suddenly smoke 32, 34, whatever percent THC. Cannabis, by the way, which doesn't really exist. I just want to make this very clear. If you look at any study out there that actually does not just take that one outlier sample, but that looks at a more overall sample of these 35% THC strains or cultivars out there, that's all a bunch of freaking marketing crap. In the end of the day, most of this product is anyways under 20%, but that's just a fact check where people will probably hate me for saying this, but well, good luck with the labeling. Looking at what happened in Canada with the labeling laws, where there was a class action lawsuit against mislabeling because it was always not just 10%, you can be within 10% range, 50, 60, 100% over on the THC content. So I do not see big issues because we will have quality control measures around the supply chain. So it will always be what is 20% in Switzerland will be 34% in Germany.
That's interesting. Okay, so some comments by some of our audience. I see, for instance, a patient activist, Simon Winnistorfer, was following us. Thank you so much.
Good to have you, Simon. That's one of the level-headed voices of the industry I was talking about.
Absolutely, he is. And just to answer Mark Hempel, do we have more recent data? We have more recent data on cannabis use, but not the one comparing CBD and THC, which is from the Health and Lifestyle Survey conducted in 2022. That's why we place it, so we are able to see the CBD and THC separated. Eric is asking for the deck. The conversation is going to still updated, so you can review it later on YouTube and on LinkedIn, but otherwise ask me and I will send you the presentation. And then Mark Hempel is asking, will Big Pharma not look at synthetic solutions rather than natural solutions? So whether the medical market will go synthetic or natural. What do you think, Luc?
Always. It will always go synthetic. It's to the consumer to decide if they want to put synthetics or natural products into their body. And it's to the industry to communicate that actually and then convey the message that, you know what, you put synthetics in your body, then you have synthetics in your system body. You can go the natural way, you have natural. So in the end of the day, it's a game that has nothing to do with cannabis. This is an active pharmaceutical ingredients play that has always been based on you can only bring one isolated active pharmaceutical ingredient to the market and then have to remix it. So this is a completely educational of consumer question that none of us will have influence if we don't all sit together and put our heads together.
Okay, there's someone asking whether this growing numbers in the pilot projects, there's going to be a bottleneck on the production side, like cultivation capacity and consistent product quality becoming a bottleneck for the pilot projects. What do you think, Luc?
We can supply the whole of Europe already now, so I'm not worried.
Not going to be a problem.
No, not quite, but Switzerland is very small, huh? So for the Swiss market, easy to keep the that there will never be a bottleneck of production within Switzerland for the Swiss market. The European one was me going out on a limb here, but
Okay, and last question, another by Mark. Regarding recreational legalization, Switzerland, will it need to work closely with other European countries to get them in the same line? Because otherwise, a legal market in Switzerland could flood the whole of Europe with products, he's implying. What do you think?
Switzerland is in very close contact with all the other countries around. Nothing has been done without any. There's working groups, there's European-wide working groups that Switzerland is part of. Again, we're talking here about the United Nations Single Convention that is above Europe that we're actually touching here. The European-wide regulation, we're Switzerland. Of course, we do what Switzerland does. We do our thing in our way. We're too small to really say to the European Union, you should do this, or that. So we try to have a level-headed approach to what we're doing, and hopefully it will lead to something that others will follow.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much to everybody that has followed this webinar. Thank you so much to our man, Luc Richner. Amazing insights. So yeah, let's stay in touch, and let's see you in the next edition of Cannamonitor webinar.
Thank you, Arnau. And a quick highlight. Thank you.